Hey guys, it's Jake here with eTrailer. Today we have a 2024 GMC Sierra 2500, and we're going to be taking a look at, and I'm going to show you how to install the B&W Turnoverball Gooseneck Hitch. Adding a B&W Turnoverball Gooseneck Hitch is going to give you kind of the best of both worlds. It'll give you a gooseneck whenever you need to haul a gooseneck trailer. There's also accessories that you can get a fifth wheel and drop it right in place. If you have a short bed like we have here, you can get the B&W Companion Slider Hitch to account for the headspace that you'll need up here to be able to make turns with a fifth wheel trailer. Or if you have an 8-foot bed, you can just get the standard B&W Companion that does not have the sliding feature because you'll have more than enough space with your 8-foot bed. The other side of having this gooseneck trailer hitch is when you're not using it, you simply take the ball out, flip it over, you'll drop it back down into its slot, and it's as if you don't have a gooseneck hitch at all. This hitch is going to be rated for 30,000 pounds max gross trailer weight rating. That is going to be the trailer plus the load included. Now when you're talking about the pin weight or the downward pressure from the trailer coupler on the ball, or the vertical load limit, that is going to be 7,500 pounds. So you want to be sure that you're not exceeding either of those capacities or the capacities that your truck is designed to handle. This kit is going to include your safety chain loops so that whenever you're hauling those gooseneck trailers, you can get those hooked up so that you're safely traveling down the road. B&W is well known for their very thick, sturdy steel construction and their gray powder coat finish. This is a very, very tough finish. I will say one thing. I've had a B&W gooseneck in my truck for about 7 years now at the date of this video, and it is all going to depend on what you do with the bed of your truck. As you can see, the truck here that we have is used for construction. So this paint job may not last if you are putting rock or building materials in the bed of your truck. It's just going to depend on what you use your truck for. Both the safety chain loops and the gooseneck ball are going to have a coating on them to help protect them for the years to come from weather or heavy usage, anything like that. Now when you need to flip the ball over, no matter what orientation you have it in, you'll have to look in your driver's side rear wheel well. You'll see the handle to unlock the pin. What you want to do is you pull straight out, pull it over to the side, and that'll lock it into place. There's just a little tab that grabs on there, and then once you flip it over, you simply push it back over, and it slams shut and locks that ball in place. Now as far as the installation goes, this install is not too terrible. Hopefully I'm able to help you with showing you how it's done. The only modifications you'll have to make to your vehicle, which is a big concern for a lot of people, is going to be a 4-inch hole in the top of your bed, 4 more holes for the safety chain loops to drop down into place, and then you'll have to remove one of your heat shields and then cut a small notch out of your wheel well liner. Other than that, you don't have to make any modifications underneath to the frame, nothing like that. A lot of gooseneck hitches, you got to drill some pretty big holes in the frame, and you don't have to with this one. This one will have weld nuts on top of the frame rail that you'll just take the hardware and thread it down into it, and that holds the hitch in place. But with that being said, hopefully the rest of this video is able to help you get your hitch installed. Now to begin our installation, we're going to have to lower down our spare tire to get it out of the way to make more room for our components to go up onto our frame rails. You want to take your key out of your key fob. There's a little lock here. You want to turn it a quarter of a turn. You'll pull the locking core out, and then we can lower our spare tire. We'll have to measure this out from the end of our bed, and it will depend on whether or not you have a long bed or a regular bed. We have a regular bed, and at the end of our tape measure, you have a little gap. That gap is designed for when you're cutting wood. It's a saw blade gap, so it accounts for the width of the saw blade. And I found that works really well to account for the thickness of our bed liner. So technically the tape measure starts at 0 at the tape measure, not at the hook. So pulling on the end of this, our tape measure is lined up with the metal on our bed, not our bed liner. If you have a drop-in bed liner, you want to remove that in order to do this install. So we'll pull this tight. We're going to measure to 37 1/8 and put our mark. And then it's not always guaranteed to go in the center of this rib. It would be ideal if it's close, but sometimes these beds can be a little misshaped. We'll measure across, and we want to make sure that we're going to be in the center of our bed. So I'm measuring 51 3/4, which is going to be 25 7/8. So we'll put a mark there. And now we've got the mark right here that we can start drilling our hole. Now you'll need to pick up a 4-inch hole saw in order to cut this hole out. And what I always recommend is make sure you get one that has the pilot bit or the guide bit with it. It'll make this process a lot easier. Just make sure you're on that mark and apply pressure and start cutting. Kind of helps if you butt the battery of your drill up against your leg, so if it starts to chuck or anything, you don't hurt your wrist. Now we'll take a file, and you want to round out the inside of this edge because it can be really, really sharp on the bottom. Now we're going to take a paint pen and just coat the inside of this metal so we don't have to worry about rust or corrosion later on. Now in our wheel wells, we're going to have to remove the liners to give us more room to access the tops of our frame rails. It is possible to do this without removing the fender liners, but I can tell you from the one time that I did it, it is very, very difficult. So you just have to remove a bunch of T15 Torx bit screws and then a couple of fasteners up in the top of the wheel well, and the wheel well pops right out. Now we can take our fender liner, and I found if you start from the center where it's split here and just kind of work your way down the edge on both sides, you can get it pulled out. We'll just set this off to the side. Now we'll have 2 bolts that are holding on our heat shield. We have one here and one here. That'll take a 13mm socket in order to get it removed. Now we're going to have 4 13mm head bolts that are holding our heat shield in place up here. We'll have one here, one a little bit further up on the frame rail, one closer to the cab on the frame rail, and then another one on this cross member. So you'll have one on each cross member and 2 on the frame rail. Now in order to get these loosened up, a ratcheting wrench like this that's got the flat end on it is really going to be helpful, especially with the ones on top of the frame rail, because there's hardly enough room to get a socket and a ratchet up there. With those 4 bolts out of our heat shield, we can pop it up, and we will not be replacing this. Now we're ready to get our rails assembled to put them up in place. I've already got the front one in place, but I'll show you how to assemble the back one. We're going to take these brackets. It really doesn't matter which side you start with on the back portion. What will matter is on the inside of the tube, you'll want the weld mark where they folded the tube over and welded it together. You want that to be on the bottom. Take this bracket, slide it up. We're going to take this bolt, slide it in from the back side going, and you just want all your hardware, all the nuts and bolt heads to be on the same side, and you want those to be facing the front of the vehicle. We'll take our nuts. Something I found here is that these threads, just from, I guess from the packaging, the threads can kind of be a little boogered up. So we'll get those hand tight. In the instructions, it'll tell you to torque these down while you've got this set down on the ground. I can tell you from experience, do not do that. It is very difficult to get the bolts in our frame rail into these holes if you've got this all rigid and tight. Now, with that being said, that's going to make it a little bit more difficult to torque these down once we get it up into place. But I'm willing to accept that challenge because getting these bolts into the tops of our frame rail are very, very difficult if this is all solid. We'll take our piece, you're gonna lift it up, and you want to slide it over the frame rail. This is why I like doing the driver's side first, because there's some wiring and stuff up here. We're gonna slide that up, and then we're gonna lift this piece up, and you can see this is where we're going to install that other bracket. Typically you can hold it with one hand, then take our bolts, slide them in to their places, and then we'll follow it up with a nut on the back side of each one of these. The sides, on top of our frame rail, you can kind of feel down through those two holes I was talking about earlier, line up the two holes in the top of our frame. We're going to take the shorter bolts that come in our kit, and we're going to thread those down into them. You want to make sure that you have got these straight on, and you should be able to thread them in all the way down. So if you can't, that means they're cross-threaded and you need to pull it back out and get it lined up straight. Now with an extra set of hands, it's going to be a lot easier to have an extra person hold this up into place. You're going to have Brad slide it up in there. You want to make sure that your hitch lines up with the hole in the bed. And then we'll take our brackets. You're going to have one bracket for the outside here. Slide our bolts through. Then you can line it up with the hitch. There we go. And do the same for this other side. And then we're going to use that same technique for the front side, so for this front bracket. So making sure that your center hole goes up into the hole that we drilled in the bed is definitely key, because what we had was this bracket here was a little bit too far forward and our hole wasn't lining up right. Now before we tighten down everything underneath, I always like to come back up inside the bed and make sure that our hitch is centered inside the hole that we drilled. So now that I've got it re-centered, we'll go back underneath and start tightening things down. Now we're going to take a 19mm socket and tighten down our frame bolts that are going through the top of our frame rails. Now we're going to take a 24mm wrench and socket and go around and tighten all of the rest of our hardware underneath. Now we're going to come back and torque all of our hardware to the specifications in the instructions. Now with everything torqued down to the specifications, we can come back and secure our handle. So you want to make sure that this is on the driver's side. We just took our two bolts, slid them up over the top. There's little slots for the carriage part of it to fall into. We'll take our nuts and thread them on. Just want to make sure that that carriage bolt stays seated in the top of that bracket. Then we'll take a 1/2" socket and snug these up. Now we can take our handle, we'll slide it over the frame rail. Then we'll take the shorter bolt that came in our kit, slide it through, and follow it up with the nut on the other side. Now we're going to take a small pilot drill bit, and we're going to be drilling out the holes for our safety chain loops. I've already taken a punch and just punched a dent right in the middle of each one of our 4 holes. Now we can take that pilot drill bit, line it up with that dimple, and drill a couple pilot holes. Now up top in our bed, I found this is a lot easier to drill out the holes. You just drill the pilot holes underneath, come up top. We're going to use a step bit until we get to the correct size that our safety chain loops fit in. In your instructions it'll say to drill it out to 11/16. In the past, if you don't, in installs that I've done, if you do not have those holes, the pilot holes perfectly centered, 11/16 is not going to be big enough. So what I like to do is drill it out till one side fits in perfectly so that you can get the safety chain loops in and out easily. Now we're going to repeat that same process for the other set. The same way we did it before for the opening for our gooseneck, we'll have to clear coat these holes we just drilled, just clear coat the metal so we don't have to worry about it corroding. We can take our safety chain loops, drop those down into place, and then go underneath our truck and finish up with our hardware. Underneath, we'll take our springs. These are to help retract the safety chains when you're not using them. We'll thread our nut on, and you want the larger end to go up first so that the smaller end holds on to the nut. And we'll want to tighten these nuts until the bottom of our safety chain loops are going to be flush with the bottom of the nut. You'll want to use a 15/16 socket in order to snug these up. With our hitch all installed, what we can do is put our heat shield back up into place. We'll put our spare tire back, put the fender liner back in our passenger side, and then once we get the fender liner back in our driver's side, I'm going to show you how to trim it. Now with our fender liner back in, right by this middle screw, you can see our handle underneath. So we'll need to cut out a section of this fender liner. You can see where it's hitting right there in the middle. So we'll take a small section here, just using a razor blade, cut straight down. There we go. Hold it up. See how far we need to go? I'm going to go right to the bottom of this screw. And we'll just keep trimming this off until we get enough out of the way for our handle to pull through. You can rotate the handle down a little bit. Should still be able to pull straight through. I'm going to just take off this little extra chunk here because it's not doing anything. There we go. So this should give the owner of our vehicle ample room to be able to pull this out, pull it to the side, lock it when they need to flip the ball over, close it when they need to lock it. Now all that's left to do is we'll take the white lithium grease packet that is included in your packet. Just want to make sure we have a small hole in it. We'll take it and we just want to smear it all over the shank of our ball. This will help to protect it over time. We want to smear it all around so that it gets every part of this coated. And essentially what this is designed to do is it'll put a barrier between the steel of the ball and the steel of the hitch itself so that the ball does not seize up inside of the hitch. Take some of that extra back off. Well guys, that's all there is to it. Hopefully this video helped you decide whether or not the B&W Turnoverball Gooseneck is right for you in your 2024 GMC Sierra 2500.